She was the wealthiest woman in the building, and within the hour, she'd be the one asking a maintenance worker for help. She had no idea it was coming. Le Lumière on a Friday night. 5 stars, a French name, and a menu with no prices printed on it.
Can I
Because
get the
in a
chocolate
place like this,
pancakes?
the cost
You
was
certainly
never
can
meant to be the
if you
point.
eat all your dinner.
Chandeliers threw light across pressed white tablecloths. Every
I think it
woman
is
at
time
every
for you to
table
leave.
wore pearls. The
have
head
nothing
waiter
left to
stood by the
discuss.
entrance with the look of a man who'd already sized you up before you crossed the threshold. Antonia Reynolds walked through that door, gripping her son Boaz's hand. She was 32, a billionaire, the CEO of Reynolds Tech, and had landed on Forbes' list 3 years running. Her dress cost more than most people's rent, and she wore it the same way she wore most things, like a shield. Boaz was 6. He had both fists knotted into the fabric of her dress and murmured, "Mom, I'm scared of all these people." She gave his hand one squeeze and kept walking without slowing down. If you've ever wondered what it means to choose being present over being flawless, stick around. Subscribe, because this one is going to sit with you. Tucked in the far corner, hidden behind a column, sat Seth Thompson, 36 years old, a delivery driver during the day, a building maintenance worker at night. His shirt was worn thin and faded, but he tucked it in anyway, because tonight mattered. His hands were rough, scarred in places, the kind of hands that carry a history words never quite managed to tell. Across from him was his daughter Clarissa, 7 years old, in a yellow dress with white buttons, her late mother's laugh living somewhere in her chest, poring over the French menu with the intensity of a scholar decoding an ancient text. She jabbed a finger at a word. "Daddy, what's this one?" "Chicken," Seth said. "And this one?" "Also chicken." She burst out laughing, bright, loud, a little too loud for the room, and completely unapologetic about it. Seth smiled. He'd brought her here because she'd gotten a perfect score on her math test, and in Seth's personal rule book, 100% earned you a place with actual cloth napkins. That had been the entire plan. What happened next would rearrange 4 lives before Sunday night was through. The floor manager, Mr. Caldwell, appeared at their table with the measured stride of someone who'd already reached a verdict and was simply going through the motions of delivering it. "Sir," no warmth in the word at all, "there's been a seating mix-up. This section is set aside for guests in appropriate dress. We'll have to relocate you." The room didn't go silent. Moments like this rarely announce themselves that way. Forks kept moving, the string quartet kept playing, and something quiet and painful happened in that corner that no one else in the restaurant registered. Under the table, Seth felt Clarissa's fingers find his. He squeezed back once. "We're fine. We're always fine." "Of course," Seth said. "Sorry about that. We'll head out now." He was already rising, already shrinking himself down the way he'd learned in rooms like this. Then Clarissa spoke, clear and unshaken. "Daddy, we didn't do anything wrong." 7 years old, in a yellow dress, without a shred of doubt in her voice. Seth looked at her, and something twisted in his chest. Pride tangled up with the sting of watching his daughter show more courage than he'd managed in that same moment. He started to stand again. That's when the elderly man at the neighboring table made a sound that wasn't right. Edward Lang, 72 years old, came to La Lumière every Friday. He still ordered for 2 out of old habit, then quietly had the second plate taken away, a routine that had gone on for 2 years, since his wife died. Tonight, his color drained fast, the way it does when the body decides something before the mind catches up. His fork clattered from his fingers. Seth was at his side before it hit the floor. No fuss, no scanning the room for someone else to handle it. He dropped to one knee on the marble, laid a steady hand on the old man's back, and spoke in a voice pitched low and calm, like it came from somewhere beneath the throat. "You're all right, sir. I've got you. Just breathe with me." Clarissa was already there, too. She scooped up the fallen fork, set it aside, and offered a glass of water with both hands, exactly the way she'd been taught. Then she looked up and locked eyes with a boy she'd never met, dark-eyed, in a navy jacket, both hands still fisted in her mother's dress. Clarissa smiled at him the easy way kids do when they've got nothing to prove. He blinked. Something in his expression shifted, like a window cracking open in a room shut tight for a long time. His mother stood just behind him, feeling something crack open in her own chest that she hadn't felt in ages. But her son had already let go of her dress, already reaching towards the table where the man in the worn shirt knelt on the marble, steady as ever. What Antonia Reynolds did next, with Mr. Caldwell watching the whole thing, was the last thing anyone in that room expected, and it would set off a chain of events none of them could have fully explained afterwards.
Antonia Reynolds hadn't asked a stranger for a single thing in 11 years. She had a personal assistant, a house manager, 3 nannies working shifts, a driver, a private chef, and 47 people on staff, plus a son who sometimes called her Antonia when he was upset, which happened more than she liked to admit. She stood at the edge of Seth's table for exactly 4 seconds. She counted them. She was that kind of person. "My son would like to sit with you, if that's all right." Seth looked up. His face didn't do what most people's faces did the moment they recognized her. No double take, no mental recalibration, no sudden shift in how he treated her. He looked at her the way he looked at anyone, a person in a room asking something reasonable. "Of course," he said, and pulled out a chair. Mr. Caldwell hovered a few steps back, wearing the face of a man watching his living room slowly flood. He pressed his lips together and said nothing. Boaz sat down across from Clarissa with the stiff posture of a kid who'd been told his whole life not to touch things, hands folded, eyes down, waiting. Clarissa fixed that in about 2 seconds. "I'm Clarissa," she announced. "My dad's taking me here because I got 100 on my math test. He says a perfect score deserves a place with real cloth napkins." She stroked the napkin next to her plate like it was sacred. "See, it's got little letters on it." Boaz leaned in. LL for Les Lumières. "Right," Clarissa said in a French accent that would have charmed any actual French person. "It means the light." A beat. "My dad knows stuff like that." Boaz laughed, not the rehearsed laugh he gave his mother's board members when they ruffled his hair, but a real one, short and surprised, like it slipped out before he could stop it. Across the table, Antonia stared down at her hands. It had been a while since she'd heard that sound from him. Meanwhile, Seth was cutting up Clarissa's steak into bite-sized pieces without missing a beat, keeping up an easy conversation with Edward Lang about fishing on the Chesapeake. Edward had steadied and was talking bass with that particular reverence older men bring to the subject, which has almost nothing to do with fish and everything to do with mornings that don't exist anymore. Boaz watched Seth's hands for a while, then asked, so softly it nearly vanished into the restaurant noise, "Can you cut mine, too, sir?" Seth glanced up. "Sure, bud." And he did it. No pause, no fanfare, nothing to signal it was anything more than what it was. Antonia went very still. Boaz had never once asked for that kind of help, not from his nannies, not his tutors, not even her. He moved through his carefully managed life like a guest passing through it, polite and closed off, and he just asked a stranger in a worn-out shirt to cut his steak. 4 small words. It landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples out toward everything she thought she understood about what her son actually needed. Her throat tightened. Then, right as the moment settled, laughter cut through it from the next table. Mrs. Harrington, pearls, 60 years old, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never once doubting her opinion was wanted, leaned toward her dinner companion and said, just loud enough to travel, "How touching, a Reynolds dining with the help." Seth's gaze dropped, his jaw tightened barely. He picked up his water glass and took a slow sip. That's when Clarissa stood up,
No warning, no wind-up. She simply rose in her yellow dress and addressed the room in the clear, unguarded voice of a child who hadn't yet learned that some rooms are designed to make certain people feel small. My daddy is the kindest man in this whole restaurant. He helped that grandpa when nobody else even noticed. He fixes things when they break. He makes people feel safe. A pause. And he would never say mean things about someone he doesn't know, because my daddy says that's not kindness, that's the opposite of it. Boaz stood too, smaller and shakier, but just as sure. Mr. Seth helped that man when nobody else did. My teacher says that's what a hero does. The table beside them went quiet. The quartet kept playing. Mrs. Harrington's companion suddenly found the tablecloth fascinating. Antonia smiled, the real one, the version that lived under all the professional ones she cycled through, and it had been gone long enough that it caught her own face off guard. The laughter didn't get the chance to fade on its own, because that's when Boaz started coughing.
It started small, a catch in his throat, a clearing sound. Then it wasn't small anymore. His face went red, then white. His hands flew to his chest. Antonia shot up out of her chair, but Seth was already moving, already there. One hand braced against Boaz's back and the other closing around a glass of warm water, his voice dropping into that same low, unshaken register Clarissa had fallen asleep to her whole life. Easy, buddy. I'm right here. Blow it all the way out first. All the way. Now breathe in. Good. There you go. Inside of 30 seconds, Boaz's breathing leveled out. His shoulders dropped, and with the total, unquestioning trust that only a child's body can decide on its own, he sagged against Seth's worn shirt and shut his eyes. The table went silent. When Antonia spoke, her voice came out quieter than anyone in her professional life had ever heard. I have 3 nannies, 2 doctors on call, a pediatric specialist on retainer. She stopped, then tried again. Why does my son trust you after 30 seconds? Seth looked down at the boy resting against him, then back up at her, the look of a man about to hand over not a wound, but a truth he'd carried a long time. Because he's been waiting for someone to sit still enough to let him be scared. Kids always know the difference. She didn't answer. Something behind her eyes shifted, the way ice shifts in early March before you can see the thaw coming. She still didn't know what Seth had walked away from to become the man in front of her, but Edward Lang, sitting quietly beside them, had been holding on to something since the previous March, and what he was about to say would freeze Antonia Reynolds in place. Edward set his glass down slowly, the way a man does when he's about to finally say something he's carried a long time. "Before you ask him anything else," he said, in the unhurried tone of someone in his 70s who learned that truth doesn't come faster for being rushed, "there's something you should know about this young man." Antonia turned to face him. "Last March, Highway 9, pouring rain. I went off the road and my car caught fire." He let the words sit a moment. "This man pulled me out, didn't ask me a single question, got me clear, put his own jacket over me, kept talking to me steady until the ambulance showed up. No drama in his voice. He'd made peace with the memory long ago. He was gone before I ever got his name, but the second he opened his mouth tonight, I knew that voice." Antonia turned to Seth slowly. He was staring at the table, thumb tracing an old burn scar on his left wrist, a habit so automatic he probably didn't notice he was doing it. "You were a first responder," she said, not a question. "Firefighter, 8 years in emergency rescue, some crisis counseling work on the side." He paused. "Left it 3 years ago." The word left sat heavy in the air. Clarissa, who always seemed to know exactly when her father needed room, slid her hand into his without a word. He was quiet for a beat, then looked up, his eyes carrying the kind of steadiness that only comes from surviving the thing meant to break you. "My wife died 3 years ago. There was a house fire. She went back in for a neighbor. She was never someone who could walk away from a person in trouble." A brief pause.
I was on a call across town. I didn't get there in time. He glanced down at Clarissa. I tried going back to the job after. Couldn't. Not because I was scared of fire, because being half there gets people killed. So I left. Now I drive packages, do maintenance shifts nights and weekends. Honest work. Keeps the lights on. He looked at his daughter, and keeps Clarissa in yellow dresses. And cloth napkins, Clarissa added quietly. He almost smiled. And cloth napkins. The private lounge at Les Lumières was quieter. A small side room off the main dining floor, softer lighting, actual comfortable chairs. Antonia had arranged it without asking anyone's permission, a habit she had since she was 24 and had never once second-guessed. The five of them stayed there another hour while the restaurant emptied out around them. Eventually, Boaz asked, with the bluntness only kids and the very elderly allow themselves, "Why do you still help people if it hurts?" Seth thought it over like it deserved a real answer. "Because someday, Clarissa might need help from a stranger, and I won't be around to give it to her myself. I want that chain to keep going." He glanced at Clarissa, then back at Boaz. "You know how at a potluck, everybody brings something different, and somehow it turns into a full table anyway?" Boaz nodded slowly. "Kindness works the same way. You bring your dish. You trust everybody else brings theirs. That's what keeps the table full." Boaz sat with that for a while. "I want to bring a dish." "Then you already get it," Seth said.
At Boaz's insistence, they all ended up back at Antonia's house. Two families who'd never planned on ending up there, and neither could quite bring themselves to leave. The Reynolds house had stopped feeling like a home somewhere around its second renovation. Beautiful, precise, every surface picked out by someone with excellent taste and 0 children. Clarissa walked in and announced, "Whoa, it's like a hotel, but with more stuff and less noise." Boaz laughed again. He'd been doing a lot of that tonight, and every time something in Antonia's chest did a quiet recalculation. By 9 o'clock, Clarissa had declared they were building a fort. 3 cushions, 2 blankets, at least 4 pillows, and very firm opinions on ceiling design, which she called the single most important architectural choice in any fort. Boaz had never built one in his life. The nannies had rules about the ivory couch cushions. Clarissa didn't wait around to hear them. Antonia stood in the doorway watching her furniture migrate across the floor and made a quiet decision, for maybe the first time in longer than she could remember, to let something be messy and good at the same time. Boaz froze right at the fort's entrance. It was dark inside, just Clarissa's voice already narrating something from within, and that particular thickness of darkness that feels deep when you're 6. Seth noticed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a beat-up silver flashlight, dented on one side, a sticker half peeled off the barrel in a child's handwriting. He clicked it on and pointed it at the ceiling. The beam hit the crystal fixture overhead and scattered into 100 tiny, trembling points of light across the white ceiling, completely by accident, and somehow the most beautiful thing in the room. Boaz stared up, mouth open. "My daddy used to do this for me," Clarissa said quietly from inside the fort, "when the dark felt too big." Boaz crawled in after her. Half an hour later, Seth suggested they take the leftover cookies to the 2 staff members still working in the back of the house. It took some explaining to Boaz, who genuinely hadn't considered that the people in his kitchen might like being thought of. He carried the plate with both hands, dead serious, the way kids carry things they understand matter. Maria, who'd worked in that house 9 years and had never once had cookies brought to her by anyone, looked at the little boy in her kitchen doorway and pressed her hand to her mouth. "Daddy says every act of kindness comes back to you," announced Clarissa from behind Boaz. Boaz turned to Seth. "Is that actually true?" "Every time," Seth said. "Maybe not right away, maybe not the way you expect, but it always finds its way back." Around 10, the evening cracked open completely. Boaz had gone quiet in the fort.
the flashlight still tracing its slow constellation across the ceiling. Then, all at once, he was somewhere else, somewhere his body remembered even after his mind had tried to move on. His breathing turned fast and shallow, his eyes locked on something no one else could see. Seth was on the floor beside him before anyone else even reacted. He didn't try to talk him out of it or make promises about the dark. He just pulled Boaz in close and held him with the steadiness of someone who'd learned through real loss that sometimes all a frightened person needs is another human being who isn't leaving. He breathed slow and deliberate, a steady beat for a nervous system that had lost its rhythm. After a while, Boaz's fist found the front of Seth's shirt and held on. "This," Seth said, almost to himself, "is what it feels like when somebody stays." Across the room, Antonia, who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without her hands ever shaking once, sat on the edge of her couch and cried quietly. The kind of crying that happens when you've been holding something too tightly for too long, and something small and real finally comes along and loosens your grip. She had one more question for Seth she hadn't worked up the nerve to ask, and the answer would come, but not from him, from the last person she'd have guessed. Saturday morning arrived the way bad news usually does, quietly, through a phone screen. She saw the first notification at 6:47, standing at the kitchen window in her robe with coffee that had already gone cold. Her team had been up since 4, but this was only out of genuine consideration for her time zone. She read her alerts before she was even fully awake. Her therapist had pointed out 3 separate times that this was a habit worth breaking. Her therapist wasn't wrong. The message came from her chief of staff, then her PR director, then 3 board members back to back, each one written in that particular corporate tone that means this is serious while pretending otherwise until everyone agrees on how to spin it. A video had leaked into a private members-only social feed. Someone at Les Lumières had filmed Boaz during his episode. 6 seconds, grainy, cruel, unmistakable. Captioned, "The Reynolds CEO's family, clearly in crisis. Is this really who we trust with a $3 billion portfolio?" By 7, the board had called an emergency session. The word stability showed up 11 times across her message threads, and not once in a way that suggested anything good. She set the coffee down. It sloshed and left a ring on the marble. She didn't bother wiping it up. Seth appeared in the doorway. He'd slept on the couch because Boaz hadn't wanted him to leave, and Seth wasn't the kind of man who leaves when he's needed. He still had on the same worn shirt, and he was holding the empty cookie plate he'd spotted on the coffee table and cleaned up before anyone had to ask. He read her face. He was good at that.
"Tell me," he said. She showed him the clip. He watched it once, silent. His expression didn't shift the way it does when someone's calculating fallout. It shifted the way it does when someone is quietly, deeply angry on behalf of a 6-year-old. "Who filmed it?" he asked. She'd already known the answer since the first 30 seconds. Only one person at that restaurant had both the access and the motive. "Mrs. Harrington," she said. Seth nodded once, no satisfaction in it, just a man confirming something he'd already suspected. "What's your team telling you to do?" "Distance myself, controlled statement about my track record, let the board handle it." She said it the way you recite something you've already decided doesn't sit right. Make it disappear quietly. "And what does that do for Boaz?" Seth said. She didn't answer. Her fingers twisted in her lap once, then went still. "Post your own video," he said. "Not scripted, not produced by anyone. Just you, in that kitchen, in that robe, telling the truth. What happened Friday night. What your son felt. Why you're grateful a stranger, a delivery driver, handled a moment better than anything on your payroll could have." He paused. "Honesty from someone in your position is rare. Nobody expects it. And kindness from a person who had every other option lands differently than any press release ever will." Antonia held his gaze, the long quiet of a mind finally agreeing to something her pride hadn't caught up to yet. "And if it backfires," she said. "Then you'll have told the truth," Seth said simply, "which is already more than what they're asking of you now." Antonia posted the video at 9:15 that Saturday morning, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, shot on her phone, kitchen, bathrobe, no script, just Antonia Reynolds talking about Friday night, about Boaz's episode, about the man who'd handled it better than anyone on her payroll ever had, about realizing she'd spent years mistaking providing for her son for being present with him. She left Seth's name out of it entirely. "His privacy matters more than my story," she'd told her chief of staff, who'd floated the idea of leaning into the human interest angle. "No," she said, "that's final." The video hit 2 million views before she went to sleep that night. The board convened Saturday afternoon, 16 people in tailored suits around a long table, Antonia at the head, composed in the way she always was, which sometimes looked like strength and sometimes looked like a woman holding a lid down with both hands. The board chair was midway through his second sentence about optics when Edward Lang walked in. Nobody had invited him. 72 years old, gray blazer, blue Oxford shirt, moving with the ease of a man with nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose. 14 years as senior advisor to Reynolds Tech gave him a seat in that room, and he used it now without apology. He sat down, looked at the board chair for a long moment, and started talking. "The man in that video pulled me out of a burning car on Highway 9 last March, covered me with his own jacket, stayed with me until help got there, then left before I could even get his name." He folded his hands on the table. "Last night, that same man was at dinner with his 7-year-old daughter, celebrating her perfect math score. He helped a dizzy old man without being asked. He calmed that boy down in a moment of real fear, using nothing but patience and steadiness. Didn't complain once." He looked around the table, slow. A working man, a single father, quietly extraordinary twice in 24 hours, with nothing in his hands but kindness. He let that sit. And this board wants to punish the CEO for letting him sit at her table? The room went silent, not the silence of people being convinced, but the deeper silence of people who've run out of an argument. What happened next to Mrs. Harrington wasn't anything Antonia had planned. It just unraveled the way certain reckonings do. A metadata timestamp, a seat assignment, a private group with a short, traceable list of members. By Sunday night, her lawyer had reached out. By Sunday morning, a stiff, clearly attorney-reviewed statement went out under her name, acknowledging she'd shared private footage without consent. It read like a grocery list someone else had written for her, but it was in print with her name on it. The board didn't take a vote. Instead, they sent Seth Thompson a formal written offer that same afternoon. Chief Wellness and Community Officer, Reynolds Tech, full benefits, a corner office, and a salary that meant he'd never drive a delivery route in the rain again. Seth read the letter twice, then set it on the porch railing and sat with it for a long while. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't what anyone in that boardroom had expected.
Sunday morning, the Reynolds house had a sound in it that it wasn't used to. Noise, the good kind, the kind with small feet in it. Cereal poured a little too enthusiastically. 2 kids talking over each other, explaining something to a man who was somehow following both threads at once, with the patience of someone who'd learned long ago that a kid's story takes exactly as long as it takes. Seth had made coffee before anyone else woke up, using the plain drip machine, not the imported espresso rig sitting on the counter like a piece of art. The drip machine had been buried in a cabinet. He found it, figured it out, and brought Antonia a mug without being asked, the old chipped navy one pushed to the back because it no longer matched the kitchen's color scheme. "How'd you know that one's my favorite?" she asked. The handle's worn different, not from decoration, from being held a lot by the same person. She looked down at it. She hadn't thought about that mug in 2 years.
Something shifted in her face, the feeling of being understood more precisely than she'd expected. Seth read the offer letter on the back porch swing, which creaked in a slow, even rhythm. Through the glass door, he could see Clarissa and Boaz, crayons out, Clarissa narrating some architectural plan with total authority, Boaz nodding the way you nod when you trust someone completely. Antonia came out and sat beside him. The swing creaked. She didn't rush into anything. "You're not taking it," she said finally. It came out less like a question than something she already knew. "Maybe I will. One condition. Name it." He folded the letter and set it on the railing. The kids come first, not as a policy, not as a clause someone reinterprets every quarter, as a real, everyday thing. He looked her directly. Boaz needs you present, not available by calendar, present, at the table, knowing when he's scared before he has to tell you. He paused. And Clarissa needs me to keep being her dad, the same as I was Friday night, not some upgraded version who got promoted and started answering by email. He let it sit. "I'll keep the delivery route for a while, too. I want Clarissa to understand that the work that got us through the last 3 years isn't something to be ashamed of just because something new came along. It's something to be proud of. She'll carry that with her forever." That last part was what actually landed with Antonia, not the negotiating, the pride behind it. Her chin lifted a little, and her eyes stayed on his a beat longer than they needed to. "Agreed," she said quietly, and she meant it. They sat together on the creaking swing while Sunday morning moved around them, sprinklers running somewhere across the yard, a mockingbird cycling through its whole repertoire in the oak by the fence, a neighbor's grandkids arriving loudly for the weekend somewhere in the distance. "She apologized, you know," Antonia said. "Mrs. Harrington. Her assistant told mine, off the record, that she watched the video of you and Boaz at the restaurant." A pause. "She cried, apparently." Seth looked out at the yard. "I hope she's doing okay." Antonia turned to look at him. "You hope the woman who tried to humiliate you is okay?" "I hope everybody's okay. That's not really a complicated thing to want." She studied him for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Not surprise exactly, more like finally locating something she'd been searching for a long time. It was, quietly, the most remarkable thing she'd heard in a year already full of remarkable things. Inside, Clarissa held up a crayon drawing for Boaz's review. She'd clearly put real effort into it. A house with a porch, 4 figures standing out front, labeled carefully in 7-year-old handwriting, 1 letter at a time. Daddy, me, Tanya, Boaz. Boaz studied it with the gravity of a professional critic. "My name has an A in it." "I know, but Boaz sounds faster." He thought about that. "Okay," he said, and took the drawing, holding it the way kids hold things they plan on keeping forever. Sunday afternoon, the 4 of them walked to Millbrook Park. Seth wore his delivery uniform. He'd put it back on that morning without a word of explanation, and Antonia had understood instantly. It wasn't a statement about the job offer, or leverage, or performed humility. It was just the truth of who he still was, unchanged, the same man in a park on a Sunday that he'd been in a restaurant on Friday when someone told him he didn't belong. At the car door, Boaz reached up and slid his hand into Seth's, the quiet certainty of a kid who'd decided something that didn't need discussing. Seth closed his fingers around it and kept walking. A few steps behind, Antonia watched her son move through the afternoon light. No navy jacket, no careful posture, running ahead now with both arms out like a small, unsteady airplane, just realizing it might actually be able to fly. And she thought, "I've missed so much. Not because I wasn't trying, because I mistook trying for being here. Those were never the same thing." She caught up and fell into step beside Seth and didn't say any of it out loud. She didn't need to. He already understood.
There was still one more moment coming, the one none of them planned, the one that would stay with all four of them for the rest of their lives. And it started, the way the most lasting things always do, with a child who had no idea she was making something permanent. Millbrook Park had that particular late April quality that makes you resent every month that came before it, everything too green, too bright, the light hitting sideways in that way that turns ordinary things into something worth looking at. An older man was feeding bread to a group of thoroughly unimpressed ducks by the pond. Somewhere behind them, a family's kite kept almost getting airborne. Someone had left a folding lawn chair with a cup holder right in the middle of the path, the kind you drag out for a 4th of July parade and never quite get back to the garage. Clarissa stepped around it with exaggerated care. Boaz took off ahead, then farther ahead, arms out, increasingly committed to the bit, and Clarissa chased after him, narrating something at full volume that no adult could quite keep up with, but that clearly had a plot. Antonia walked beside Seth without talking, the comfortable kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. "I used to think," she said, "that if I built something big enough, Boaz would eventually understand the sacrifice, that he'd look at everything I'd built and know it had all been for him." Seth listened. "He's 6, she said. "He doesn't need to understand the sacrifice. He needs me standing next to him in the park. That's it." "That's exactly it," Seth said. They kept walking. The mockingbird in the oak by the pond finished its full set and started over from the top. That evening, Antonia posted one more video. She titled it something close to what the whole story had turned into. It ran 4 minutes. She talked about kindness, not in vague, inspirational poster language, but specifically, the cookie plate a 6-year-old carried to the kitchen without being told to, the old flashlight that turned into 100 points of light across a white ceiling, by accident, a man kneeling on a marble floor because an old man's fork slipped, because that was simply the thing to do. She talked about the cut-up steak. That one detail landed harder than any of the rest. A man cutting a child's food because the child asked, and the answer was just yes. It reached people in a way no polished statement ever could have. The comments piled up, thousands, then hundreds of thousands. "I called my son tonight because of this. Hadn't talked to him in 3 weeks, not sure why I waited. My dad was a man just like this. He's been gone 11 years, and I still feel him next to me whenever I'm decent to a stranger. I'm a single dad, sitting in my truck right now writing this. Didn't think anyone noticed guys like us. Thank you. Made cookies for my neighbor this morning. 6 years living next to her, and I don't think I ever have before." Seth never saw any of it. He was home, their apartment, with the kitchen drawer that always stuck a little, and the quilt on the couch missing a corner, and the fridge that hummed slightly off-key. He was helping Clarissa pack her backpack for Monday, checking her water bottle was full, tucking the folded napkin note into her lunchbox, the one he wrote every single school morning, had written every day since kindergarten started. "You are braver than you know, kinder than you realize, and the best thing that ever happened to your old dad. Have a great day, Bug." She read it every time. He knew because the paper always came home slightly recreased. He tucked her in, cut the light. Then he sat for a while in the hallway in the dark, the way parents do once the last door closes, letting the weight of a full day settle. He didn't feel a hero. He felt a man who kept putting one foot in front of the other, and along the way had kept the small stretch of world around him a little warmer than he'd found it. That had always felt enough. It still did. There's a lesson in here that Seth never once said out loud. He didn't have to. He just lived it. He showed up all the way with nothing to gain from it. Here's what that could look like for you on an ordinary Tuesday this week. Pick one neighbor you haven't spoken to since the weather turned. Bring something small to the door, a few cookies on a paper plate, a jar of last fall's apple butter. Skip the speech. Just knock. It doesn't need to turn into a 20-minute visit. It just needs to happen. If you've got a grandchild nearby, ask them over Saturday morning, no occasion needed. Roll out biscuit dough in the same bowl your mother used. Let them make a mess. Let the kitchen smell something warm. That 1 hour will outlast almost anything you could buy them. And before the TV goes on tonight, write down the name of someone you're quietly grateful for. Someone who held a door, remembered your name, asked how you were doing, and actually waited to hear the answer. Then, if you're able, tell them. A card, a call, even a note left in their mailbox. Seth Thompson carried around a beat-up old flashlight and turned a dark ceiling into a sky full of stars. You already have everything you need to do the same. One small act of kindness can change the course of someone's whole life. Never underestimate a tired single dad doing his best. Start your day with one act of kindness. It always finds its way back. From the Rebuilt Stories channel, a reminder that kindness works like a seed. Sometimes it sits buried under cracked, dry soil for a while, but given a little patience and a little faith, it always finds a way to sprout and paint the whole sky with color.